Okay, so thank you to everyone who is on here today attending this session. This is our second week of the Coach Socialization series. And today Evan will be talking about setting targets and goals. So just so you're all aware, we did start these series just to provide a platform for coaches to connect during this time of social distancing, and provide a platform for you guys to connect and learn from each other and continue to do this while we're social distancing. So if you do have any questions throughout this presentation, just feel free to write them in the chat box. We will be providing time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A, so we'll turn your mics on then. And then we will be posting this on YouTube later for you to share with your fellow coaches or to review any of the information. And without further ado, Evan, take us away on goal setting.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. And all familiar faces joining today, so that's a good sign. We are going to briefly go through this. We could talk about setting targets, goal setting for a few hours, but really what I want to do is just talk about the quick hits. What are some things that we could think about? Why should we be setting targets? And what are some of the key takeaways from this? I will, if Kirsty's okay with it, I'll give an opportunity to ask questions or get some feedback from you as we're going through it. So maybe, Kirsty, I'll just say, what do you guys think? Or what do y'all think? And then you can turn their microphones back on and we can have a good conversation around that. If that's cool. Okay. So the agenda, there's 8 things in here. We're not going to go through them at any extreme length, just sort of the things that I want to touch on, which we'll get through shortly. Some of the outcomes from the session. So ideally, you can understand the importance of setting targets, have confidence in sharing your targets. And this is something that, there's debate about. So this is where I'd like to have a bit of discussion with the 4 of you that are online is, what are the pros and cons to sharing your targets or your goals? You should be able to describe the difference between performance targets and program targets, create a mechanism for tracking your steps to reach your targets, and then we'll introduce you to the evaluation component of tracking. However, evaluations would be another presentation in and of itself. So maybe we'll save that as like a sequel, depending on how long we're hunkered down in our basements, living rooms, dog houses, wherever we may be. I also promise this will be the wordiest slide that we have today. So first, just was looking to get an idea of who's out there, who's involved. Was hoping for a big crowd. The crowd looks more like our solo ice fishermen down there today, which is good. So I believe maybe Natalie, I'm going to take a guess. I think you're a rugby coach, from what I recall. Is that right?
Yep.
Excellent. Moonlighting as a rugby coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. So we've got volleyball, rugby, soccer, and rowing in the room. And all generally from Halifax, Dartmouth, correct? Or currently residing in the greater HRM. These are just some photos that I wanted to share to remember what it's like to be outside on nice days, whether we're taking the ferry, hanging out in Lunenburg, at Cape Split, doing the Skyline Trail in Cape Breton, or in any random coastline in a fishing boat. Also, this is what our training venues look like right now. They're just sitting, waiting for coaches and athletes to get back in there. It's an interesting new time for all of us. Nobody's ever experienced this before. So I thought that that's why this topic would be important, is to talk about planning and monitoring, because oftentimes we just don't have time to do it. We spend a lot of time, okay, what's the next practice look like? What's the next competition? We have to go find a new assistant coach. I've got to do this, got to do that, got to do this. I have a full-time job while I'm coaching. So, this is, I'm trying to find the silver lining in this downtime is what could we be doing with our energy and our passion that we have for coaching, and that is around setting targets. So just something that I want to talk about really quickly is the nomenclature. So goals, objectives, targets, to me, they're all interchangeable. I avoided goal setting today because it's often connected to the mental performance component of things. So if you've come here today to talk about mental performance support, I can't really provide that. I may ask for some mental health support dealing with a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old at home. If any of you guys have any support on that, I know Matt and Pat, you have young kids at home too. It's a new challenge. So the nomenclature, goals, objectives, targets, it's all virtually the same. It's whatever you're comfortable with using. So today I looked at just talking about it in the form of targets, but I just want you to know that it's all interchangeable. Then when we get to monitoring, we'll also talk about outcomes, which are sometimes identified as KPIs and or KPOs, or milestones. So in my unprofessional opinion, I would suggest that you stick with whatever your club or your organization prefers to use. If it's steps, milestones, key performance indicators, key performance outcomes. There's lots of debate about what term to use. I just wouldn't really get into that. Just follow with whatever the organization chooses. So first, I just think of like, have you ever got in the car and just started driving? For no real reason, just jump in and go. I bet at some point while driving, you came up with a location, whether that's a beach, a friend's house, in my case, a McDonald's drive-through usually. Either way, chances are you're not just jumping in your car just to go for a drive with no particular place in mind. When you do, what you're doing is you're wasting your time and resources, which in this case is gas, because you jumped in the car before you knew where you wanted to go. So think of this as coaching with no targets. It's sort of aimlessly driving around. Now, as we jump in the buggy, imagine picking someone else up in that car. And they get in and say, where are we going? You say, oh, I don't know, we're just driving around. This is, I mean, as I'm thinking about this, I'm from Cape Breton and we do this a lot, at least back in the late 90s. But eventually there's somewhere that we want to go. And so your co-pilots, your people riding shotgun, they're okay with it for a little bit if they have time to kill. But if not, they're going to get pretty anxious when there's no destination in mind. So you'll frustrate your passengers when you're just driving. So in the sport context, think of your passengers as your assistant coaches, your administration, your athletes, and the parents of your athletes. If they are just along for the ride and don't really know why they got in the car in the first place, they're going to start to say, I don't even know, why are we training this way? Why did you make that turn? Where are we going in this direction? So think of it of when you're picking somebody up and you're saying, here we go, we're on our journey together. This is where we're going. So based on what I just sort of used as my car analogy, and we'll come back to that later, I'll open it up to the floor or to the chat room. Could you give me some other reasons why we would set targets as coaches?
Pat, you got to go first.
I think it starts to
focus your attention and put you in a situation where you can determine if you're hitting it or not, like if you're on track. So to provide you with feedback, I think.
Right. Yep. It's a good one. Natalie?
I think that in my world, it's often a matter of a lot of athletes are very structured people. And so in order to keep them mentally okay most of the time, that there needs to be things that they're trying to work towards or set or achieve, right?
Matt or John, do you have anything to contribute? If not, that's totally cool too.
I think it's just to build on what Pat said and what Natalie said. It's just to give us some kind of roadmap as to where we want to be. Know that we're heading in the right direction towards our ultimate goal.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about sharing our targets and our goals. I've worked with a lot of coaches over the last decade in provincial and national, international sport. There's usually a debate between whether they're comfortable with sharing their goals or not. So this is sometimes scary for people. It's scary for coaches. There's a bit of a worry about failure. What are people going to say if I don't reach my goal? So there's a balancing act to play here. Being public with your goals allows for team buy-in. So what I was saying, when you're public with your goals, at least with your, we'll say it's private with your goals, but sharing with at least your athletes and your administrators and your assistant coaches of here's what we want to do. This is what this season is all about. This is what our goal is for this year. It helps you get buy-in, but it can also build that steam engine to help you get there. It's really hard to reach your goal when you're all by yourself and you're not sharing it. You'll also have so many questions like, so again, as I'm using the car analogy, why did we turn left here? Well, if none of the passengers know where we're going, we can't even ask that. We just turn aimlessly driving. There's also that public statement that then applies that gentle, hopefully sometimes pressure to do the work to reach the target. And I'll give you an example that I've done personally, and it's about New Year's resolutions. I'd set a couple. I used to do this a lot. I'd set like 8 for 2008 or 9 for 2009. I hit one, maybe. But then I started sharing. Well, here's the 5 things that I want to do, and I would sort of open myself up to be held accountable for my own goals. And I seem to have done a much better job at adhering to it when I shared, well, this is actually what I want to do. This is why I have this goal in mind. This is what I need to do to get there. I'm sharing it with you. Help me stay within the gutters or stay on the inside. It's not a very good bowling analogy. Help me hit the pins when I'm aiming towards my resolutions. So maybe I'll open it up to the group again. Why would sharing be important? And I'll ask John first.
I guess kind of 2 things kind of come to mind. Number 1 is just making sure you and like your team or your group of athletes or your athlete are on the same page. Like that could be an immediate speed bump if you're like, hey, this is where I hope to get to, and I'd like you to help. Like I'd like you to get there too, and they're just like, well, no, that doesn't match what I want to do. So that comes to mind right away. Yep. And I also just think like having that, and it kind of goes back to what you already said, but sharing them, creating it lets you know the roadmap. Sharing it makes sure like you have a navigator beside you who also knows where you're trying to go. Because I know as a coach, sometimes I get off track of my targets, and if there's someone beside me, either an athlete or someone else on a coaching staff, just kind of little reminder, you're like, hey, don't forget what we're trying to accomplish, or hey, didn't you want to do this today or this week or this season? you get to the right place sooner. You knock down more bowling pins, Evan.
Thank you for sparing me of that analogy.
Nice.
I'll leave it if anybody else has anything that they want to add of why it would be important to share.
I think it just keeps you accountable.
Yeah.
Keeps you accountable to your goals. So
That's good. Now on the flip side, can you come up with a reason why it would not be a good idea to share your goals?
I attempted to do a half Ironman last year, and part of the drive or the motivation originally was like, okay, well, I'm going to share it, and then it's going to commit me to it. And then, of course, I trained for like 18 months and went and did it, and got my butt kicked by the course and ended up not finishing it, and then had to like crawl home and like repost that I didn't finish. So that can definitely be a downside of sharing your targets when you fail.
But have you ever heard DNF is better than DNS?
Yeah.
Right. So at least you tried and you followed through on your goal as far as you could, and lots of lessons that you've learned.
No, I know, but I'm only half joking. But yes, it was hard. I was like, I don't even know what to post. I need to cry for 2 days and then I'll post.
That's okay. I mean, I think that's a really exciting thing to do. So possibly you could see it as a bad idea, or you can go on a speaking tour of lessons learned
while failing in an Ironman.
Yeah, I mean, how many people would even consider even attempting it?
Yeah, well,
right? So that's really cool.
Lots finished that day, but yes, I know it was fun. I'm not sore about it at all.
There's always another one.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we want to get into, there's two types of targets, goals, objectives. One's performance targets, which we'll talk about now, and the other's program targets. So performance targets are probably things that come to mind so far when we've been talking about targets. Win provincials, win nationals, get athletes on a Canada Games team, win NSSAF regionals if school's back in, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually about a performance. Can anybody else think, or anybody else like to provide some other performance target ideas? I'll come back to it. So some of the groups that I've worked with also talk about a plus minus in scoring. So for example, they always qualify for nationals, but they just can't get to the gold medal game. So instead of setting a target of we want to win the gold medal this year, the target is when we're up against the top two provinces, let's say for example it's in soccer or hockey or any sport that would have a goal, it would be we want to keep the score to within a -5 amongst 3 games. So if you lose 6-5, 5-3, and 4-2 against the top 3 provinces, you actually still meet your performance target. You're not the national champion, but compared to what you were last year when you got blown out by those 3 provinces, you're showing that you're improving. Your program is getting closer to those performance targets. Sometimes it's around efficiency and field goal percentage for basketball, or percent of a first place time. Like Pat, I know in rowing, you guys use gold medal standard, gold medal time.
Yeah, we use that a lot.
Right. So it's how far off are you from the best in the world, knowing that you're probably not competing against the best in the world that day, but what does that standard of time show in your race compared to the best? Efficiency and average placements. So if you're working with individual sports or individual athletes, it could be combat sports. Let's say across 10 athletes at a regional event, you want the average placement to be 5th. So that's where you can you can have your performance team targets. That's not just team sports, So you can build that camaraderie around these performance targets as well. The one thing that all these have in common is that they're a result of a competition or a statistic. So this is what makes them performance targets. This is how we can clearly define a performance target, is it has to occur during a field of play, or it has to have occurred as a result of a result, if that makes sense. So, let's say you had a goal to get an athlete on Team Canada in an individual sport or in a team sport. Those athletes are still being selected based on their performance in a camp or at an event. So it's still a performance-based target. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is what separates them from program targets, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the trap here, that's what is the trap. This is when, do you guys still see that slide? Presentation still there?
Yep.
Okay. This is where your performance targets don't follow the SMART principle. I'm happy that I've gotten this far into the presentation without reciting the specific measurable, achievable, or attainable, realistic and timely principle, is that sometimes our performance targets ignore the A and the R, relevant, sorry. So are they attainable and are they relevant? For example, my apologies to the Nova Scotia, no, my apologies to the Newfoundland speed skaters out there. But if Newfoundland speed skating's target in performance was to have more medals than Quebec at the short track national championships, there would probably some pretty good argument that that is not an attainable performance goal, performance target. And to be honest, actually not relevant for that for that program at that time. And the reason why I say that is because if in the sport of speed skating, Quebec is a powerhouse, it would be really hard for a province like Newfoundland, who has a small history of speed skating, to be able to knock off Quebec this year. If there was a goal to work on their percentage of time or increase their average placement, then they can show that they're getting closer and that someday they can challenge Quebec for the most medals. But it's not a not a relevant or attainable performance target. So that's the trap. We can all go out there and say, we want to win the national championships. Sometimes when your goal is so far-fetched, you might lose buy-in because of it. You can also focus on the process. So this is where I'll talk about program targets in a second, but you don't have to necessarily say, as a coach, my goal is to win nationals, or my goal is to win provincials and nothing else. There's process parts to this as well. And before we go to the program component, I'll pause if there's any questions. Okay. So then program targets. What is a program target? Well, it's pretty much everything else that you want out of your program that you would like to measure, or that you can say, we are moving along this continuum of excellence. And by excellence, I don't mean international excellence. I just mean running excellent programs. So, Pat, could you provide me with an example of a program target for your sport?
Immediately, I think sort of along the lines of having a certain number of athletes. Sorry, we're competing with Paw Patrol here. Having a certain number of athletes who are within a certain percent of gold medal standard, or a certain number of athletes who are hitting improvement on their monthly testing or something like that.
Right. So one of your program goals is to have more athletes hitting a specific standard or a specific program. Good. I hope Chase is on the case. Would anybody else like to share a program target that they would have?
Every season we do a survey monkey on each athlete where they get to fill out their goals personally for skill development and improvements on and off the pitch. And we sort of touch base halfway through the season and at the end of the season to sort of see, did they hit their own personal targets?
Okay, good. Some of the other things that we could think about, some is about training time. So a program target would be, we want to reach X amount of hours training. There could be, we want to attend this amount of out of province or out of region competitions. There could be something about, we would like to be individually coaching athletes for this amount of hours. We would like to have this amount of assistant coaches helping our club run the program. Something about equipment. Could be something in there about, say if you're doing fitness testing, a goal for testing scores. To get a little bit more of the on the field of play program targets, you can talk about, you need to raise $12,000 or $20,000 to be able to achieve our targets, because we need this to get to these places. It could be, we want this many athletes or this many members at our club. And then once you get them, your program target could then be about retention. We want 75% of all the people who were members of our club last year to be joining our club again this year. That's usually a good sign of good programming, is when you have the same people coming back while also adding more individuals. So we had a trap the last time. So this is the trick with program targets, is they need to be specific and they need to matter. So ultimately, how do these program targets help you reach your performance target? It all has to connect. So for example, if you want to win provincials, or you want a certain number of athletes to win their discipline or their distance in provincials, you know that the best athletes in the province are training 15 hours a week, and you train 5, but you have a performance target to win provincials. My suggestion would be to have a program goal of increasing your training hour average per week to something closer to what the best athletes in the province are doing. Alternatively, adjust your program target to not win provincials if your program targets can't be met. I mean, specific to this, if you are going to go from 5 hours a week to 15 hours a week training, you might want to have Natalie on speed dial, just in case you see a specific spike in athletic injuries by not building up. But you get the point. I'm trying to say that your program targets need to help you get to performance target. And then we have athlete targets. So think of these, and Natalie touched on this with her Survey Monkey, is these are the individual efforts to help make your performance targets and your program targets a reality. So, some of the examples that I thought of really quickly were like an individual's kill efficiency in volleyball, for example. Or, if you're a baseball or a softball coach, you have any number of statistical data to run with your individual athletes. In hockey, it could be a plus minus. For basketball, it could be rebounding. All these things will likely play into performance targets that will help you lead to the ultimate target for your season. So I think it is really important that, and I'll share this in a second, is the flow between the individual athlete targets, your program targets, and your performance targets. And John, with volleyball, you touched on this earlier, is like sharing sharing the targets with the athletes so that when the athletes are a part of your team or a part of your program, they know what they're in for, and then they understand what they need to do to contribute. So everybody needs to feel like they've got a paddle in the water moving this boat forward. So this is a non-peer reviewed, however, made sense to me, pyramid for targets. And the first thing that you see at the base is your vision. We did not talk about vision at all. And I got this idea from conversations with Wade Gilbert, who's a very well-known researcher in coach education and coach enhancement. And the vision is, where do you see your program, whether that's an age group within your club, whether that's a provincial association, whether that's a national association, whether that's high school, is where do you see your program over a number of years? So think of this as like, what do you want to build? What does your program look like in a decade? Not just what are your performance targets for this year? So think about this not long when the athletes you're currently coaching are gone, or possibly they're part of your coaching staff. But this is connected to your coaching philosophy. We didn't talk about vision or coaching philosophy at all. And the reason because this is a really big topic and something that someone with extensive knowledge, where there's a few in this province that could definitely maybe do a webinar on coaching philosophy and creating a clear vision. I can't even say it properly, so I'm definitely not going to be the person who walks you through this. So can you get your performance targets without a defined coaching philosophy and vision? Yes, absolutely. But if you look at it this way, your pyramid base is just a little bit smaller, so it has an opportunity to wobble a little bit. You could also see this as sort of your vision is on the bottom, and on the top of the triangle is, you know, your vision is that ultimate succession of performance targets, but it's also that succession of program targets too. It's not just about results when you're coaching. It's not just about winning nationals for 10 straight years. It's about high quality training, producing high quality people, not just the victories on the field of play. Does anybody have any questions on this? Do a 5-second countdown.
Yeah, I probably should ask this question like a slide ago. But when you say program targets, would that be really similar to saying like process outcomes?
It can be. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I think of like, I mean, a wording that Megan and I use a lot would be like performance outcomes, and then process outcomes. Like the performance outcomes, I think would be like your performance targets.
Yeah.
And then process is kind of like it's like you said, it's not the result of a result. It's like all the little breadcrumbs that will get you there. But if I'm not right, I want to make sure I kind of understand, and if I'm kind of on the same line.
No. Yep. You're in lockstep with me, John. You can think of it like your program targets, let's say, could be something like, you know, okay, let's say it is about athlete retention if you're running your own club. Some of the things to monitor, or some of the program outcomes to pay attention to, would be, are we training our coaches? And the reason why, how is that connected to retention, is that if we train and support our coaches and make sure that they feel supported, they'll do a better job, hopefully, with our athletes, so that our athletes feel valued and want to come back. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we're drinking from the same fire hose. Okay. Back in the car. Does anybody know where this might be? I'll give you a hint. It's not Lawrencetown.
Is that Tofino?
Yes, very good. I was just trying to think of where somewhere that's really far away, but still in Canada. Okay, so we're in the car. Let's say our performance target is to get to Tofino. There's so many ways to get to Tofino from either side of the bridges. We can walk, we can bike, we can jog, we can cartwheel, we can fly, we can take a boat. We can do a rickshaw, horseback. You get the idea. So what we're trying to do today is figure out what would be the fastest way to get to Tofino. So again, the performance target is to get to Tofino. With the one key thing to keep in mind are our resources, which would be the relevant and the attainable component of our goals or our targets. So a private jet would get us there the quickest, for sure. But not everybody can afford that. So let's say the fastest way to get to Tofino that we can afford is by car. Okay, so now we have the first step. The next thing we have to think is, well, there's many routes to get to Tofino. The first question is, do we stay in Canada for as long as possible? Or do we stay in Canada the entire time? Or is there maybe a shorter route through the States? To me, there's an obvious choice here. But this is where sport specifically gets fuzzy. Maybe your organization has bylaws that say you must take the Canadian route. So right away, you're at a bit of a disadvantage by the policies that might not make sense to you, but they're also something that you can't fix or are not in your control. You can bring it up, you can flag it and say, we should probably look at this, but it's going to impact our effectiveness at reaching our performance goal. I should stop and say we need to get to Tofino by a specific time, not just get to Tofino in general. So right away, you might be disadvantaged by the policy that might not make sense to you. So you know that you can drive and the route's not within your control, or your control is in debate. Sorry, a 3-year-old just found their Easter treats. So my performance target is already 13 days ruined, and there'll be no mini eggs for me later. Sorry, everybody. So this is what we're saying when we mean effective and efficiently. Sure, we can get to Tofino, but maybe not in a timely manner or as economically as we actually think we could. So these are some things that will impact our performance targets. All that being said, with this analogy of the performance target of getting to Tofino in X amount of days, what are some program goals that fit within this analogy that we could use? Natalie, what do you think?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So the performance target is to get to Tofino by, say, 14 days.
Okay.
So we know that we're ultimately measured of, did we get to Tofino in 14 days? What are some things that wouldn't impact the 14 days, but could contribute to it from a non-performance standpoint?
Okay, I'm still not quite following.
Yeah, I'll give you an example.
Well, I got two.
Okay, John, let's hear it.
Do it.
I could be wrong. I think of, because I've had to drive across Canada with my parents a lot. Like, where are we going to stop every night? Like what communities are we going to stop at? Who's going to drive and for how long? Is one person going to drive the whole day? Or are we going to like split it up in shifts? Who's going to control the music in the car DJ? What car snacks are we going to have? Now I'm just going crazy here, but like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
I feel like we hit a nerve with this example.
Triggered.
But yes, so absolutely, those are the sorts of things that I'm talking about. So, how much money are we going to spend on accommodations when we get there? So that would be a program target, so it'd be under X amount. And let's say we run out of money and we have to sleep in the car. Is that going to have an impact on our performance when driving the next day? Yeah, because then we're probably a little more tired because we were sleeping, upright the whole time. Or how much money did it cost on gas? So we only want to make, I don't know, these days we could probably get to Tofino on like $100, but 3 weeks ago it was probably not the case. So some of the other program targets would be fuel efficiency, how many driving hours per day to stay fresh, what are the snacks that we're packing, what are the driving responsibilities, and making sure that we're hitting those targets, because based on our best mapping, it's these snacks, this many hours taking turns driving, this many hours today, a day driving, and being able to say, if we can get to Riviere de Loup on the first day, that's a good milestone marker to say that we're on track. Makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. Love when metaphors work, unlike our bowling one. Okay, so monitoring. Here's the important thing. Having a goal or setting a target is just one thing. There's a term, and I don't know who said it, but it's a great one. It's a goal without a plan is just a wish. So you have to set up milestones and steps, and there has to be dates and accountabilities and responsibilities to ensure that you maintain the right path. So usually it's our program targets or our program steps that will help us indicate if we're on the right road towards our performance targets. We could have some performance targets based on other performances. So for example, we need to be this competitive in a few games with some New England teams to know if we're going to be competitive at nationals. And you do that early enough in the season so that you can say, hey, we are on track, or these are some things that we're going to need to work on for us to reach our ultimate performance target. You can get overwhelmed here. There are so many things that you can monitor, but you need to boil it down to what's manageable for you and what matters most to reach your performance target and that vision. So a word of caution here is you may need to give some components of your program to incubate. Sometimes we'll say, especially when we're looking at our vision, that in 3 years we want to be the national champion. And one of the program targets is that we need a pool of 15 athletes who are competing for 9 spots after year 1. And after year 1, you have 11 athletes competing for those spots. That doesn't necessarily mean that your program's not working. That just means that it might take a little more time to get to what you thought. So when you're setting your performance targets and your program targets, it has to be a living document, and you have to be able to negotiate with yourself and your what we'll call stakeholders, which would be your athletes and your other coaches, about, no, we didn't hit it right away, but look at how we're trending. It's still looking good. Your program targets, when you first do them, are essentially benchmarks. If you've never tracked what the previous season or the previous year looked like, then you're just saying, we think this is what's going to happen, but we don't actually know until we start tracking it. And here's what you need to remember. You need to take notes. You need to notice, because when you stack up your results of your performance targets and you under or overachieve, the only way to really understand where you fell off pace or exceeded is if you know what actually made the impact. It's important to know that missing your performance targets is okay, but not acting on your program's milestones or steps is not okay. So again, let's say you had that big goal of winning national championships. You get a really tough draw and you're in relegation or whatever. So your performance target might be that you ended up finishing third. Whereas the best performance your group has ever had was seventh. Does that mean that everything you did was wrong? Not at all. You need to you just may have reached a little too far in your performance targets. But the only way to adjust and know what actually really worked to make that difference from seventh place to third place is by tracking the program targets that you had. What did you change in your training? What did you change in your coaching approach? So if you don't monitor and you finish your season and you hit your target or you didn't hit your target, but you didn't really pay attention to the steps, you just say, what do you know? And have no idea what caused it or didn't cause it. And then you're back to, well, what do we do this year? Don't really know what occurred. And then we have evaluation. So this is where our steps, our targets, our milestones, our feedback, our outcomes all come together. There's so many things at play here, but what's most important is do it when it makes most sense. So there can be some mid-season evaluations, but when we're looking at the wrap-up of the whole season, it's usually after that penultimate competition is over, not immediately, because you'll get emotional responses, but not too late either, because then you'll have people who, they've moved on with life, especially if you're working with athletes and volunteer coaches or people who are coaching on the side. You need to get it when that's fresh. And that's usually around that 2.5 week, 3.5 week window of that's the best time to get feedback. What your evaluation looks like, surveys, focus groups, individual interviews, like there's so many things that we could talk about that at another time, but what you really need to know is the best time to evaluate. And what's really important on the evaluation component is to ask questions and seek feedback on things you are willing to change. Nothing will annoy members or athletes more than asking for feedback on something and then not changing it, especially when it was a resounding response. So let's say we go back to Tofino, or we're back at this car driving analogy. We asked the people who were in the car, what would you change? What would you do differently? And they say, well, we'd fly next time. And you say, okay, cool. We can't. We have to drive. Then they're like, well, why did you even ask me the question? So you want to avoid that. Where you get to like, thanks for your feedback. We are not going to implement it, but we appreciate the feedback. Make sure you're asking questions about things that you can control, which could be something about like access to training or access to certain things where you'd say like, I'll pick on rowing. Would you like to train at 5:15 in the morning? The answer is probably no, we don't want to. Well, what are the other options when the lake's full, when you're in school? So, asking about the things that aren't super controllable is not the best approach. So in summary, the key steps are your performance targets and separating them from your program targets, making sure that the right people know the right things and sharing with the right people, getting buy-in, and then having a plan to monitor them, and then getting that quality feedback from the evaluation. Usually your performance targets are yeses or nos. Yes, we perform. Yes, we hit that performance target. No, we didn't hit that performance target. But then how did people feel about the approach? What are some things that they thought could have led to the achievement or falling short of those performance targets for the individual athlete and for your program? So at this point, I'll open it up to questions, comments.
Yeah, I have a question. Just kind of going back to like the SMART goal process, like, is the A attainable? What's the
Specific, measurable. Yes.
okay? So like, what would you consider to be the definition of attainable in a performance goal context? And before you answer, is it like, so when I think of volleyball and like Canada Games, let's say we want a medal. We want to be on the podium as a performance goal.
Mm-hmm.
But if we played that tournament 10 times, like, it might only be realistic for us to medal like 3 out of those 10 times. If you keep going back in time. So I mean, like, it's attainable, but there's like a percentage of attainability, if you know what I mean. Like, is that wrong to say like we want a medal if everything goes right 3 out of 10 times, like we can do it?
To me, I think if you could do it 3 out of 10 times, that is attainable. I think maybe like if you want to put it in like one little step back, if you say to make the semifinals, that might be easier because then you're pretty much in a medal game at least. But if you let's say John, like 5th, 6th is something that your group usually does, then you're sort of sandbagging your targets. What wouldn't be good is to say we want a medal and we do everything we've done every time we didn't medal. If that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
if your program targets are exactly the same and your performances have never been in running for that top 3 placement, then you would probably need to say it's not attainable because we're not actually doing anything different.
Okay. So like to say like that's a performance target, but again, if my program targets were the exact same as like the last couple of quads, then I'm really setting myself up not to meet my performance target.
That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Counter arguments?
My only question for some of the other coaches and you that are using other technology, do you guys have programs or consistent ways that you're collecting information from the athletes, or programs that you're setting your goals for the season on, or what other technologies out there?
Do you mean in like present day pandemic or just in general?
Yeah, no, I just mean in general.
I know in volleyball, I guess we collect lots of video. So I mean, like, we got a whole bunch of portable hard drives because we cart them around the gyms and we'll put them on the cloud so we can share those with the athletes or other coaches. We have boatloads of Excel documents or Google Sheet documents where we're just inputting like daily training results. You passed 10 balls. What was the result of the 10 balls? You're doing that day over day. Same thing, like a tab for testing. But yeah, I think almost everything we're doing now, it just has to be shareable with the athlete and with the coaches. So like pen and paper, not so much. An Excel document, it's okay, but you still have to email it to someone. So like the Google Sheets or for video, there's like some online platforms that volleyball uses a lot, like that anyone can log into. That's what we're using.
Cool. Any other coaches?
Yeah, we use Kinduct. So so there's a survey that goes to the athletes on the number of training hours or minutes that they do with their rating of perceived exertion, and that creates a bit of an idea of their training load. And then we're tracking sort of their normal training load or like average training load, and then their actual for the week. So then we're starting to see the undulation and if that's what was actually planned in the YTP. And then there's actually some other technology we can use in rowing with and I'm still trying to figure out how we can actually use it and track it, but sort of their performance, their again, their load. So the elements of load, so intensity and duration on the rowing machine. But then we're also trying to look now at the wattage using some special gates or oarlocks to start measuring the wattage that they're using, and see if we can sort of upload that to the cloud and get a bit of a sense. And then we also just track things with a stopwatch, pretty old-fashioned stuff, just for those intermediate markers. But I don't know if that's any help.
What did you say the program was, Pat?
Kinduct. I think it's a Nova Scotia, actually, a Halifax company.
Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty neat, all the things that they can do with that.
And how do you spell it, Pat?
KINDUCT, I think.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Pat brought up or stirred some thoughts into my mind. Is when collecting data from athletes, make sure that they know why and what you are going to do with the data that you get. Because I've seen a lot of coaches use things like Kinduct or even like a Hooper McKinnon questionnaire just to get athlete health feedback, and then not change the programming whatsoever. So it really frustrates the athletes when I keep saying I'm burning out, yet nothing changes. Coach doesn't do anything about it. So if you're collecting that information or asking for that information, again, it's back to that question about, you're going to ask questions, make sure you're willing to make changes to it. The second thing is another quote that I can't remember who said it initially, but what matters gets measured. So if you think that something matters in your program or what matters in your athlete's performance, that's what you're measuring. And if you're not measuring it, it can't be that important.
All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone who came on today for our session. Like I said before, if you have any ideas or any questions or comments about these sessions, please feel free to reach out to me. We plan to do these for as long as the social distancing continues. So if you have any more ideas, please send them my way. Our next session will be tomorrow morning. So every Wednesday we'll be offering some sort of at-home workout or something around working out at home that you can pass on to your athletes or you can use for yourself. So tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. will be an at-home workout with Scott Wilgers, who is a strength and conditioning coach at CSCA. So definitely check that one out and pass it on to your other coaches. But for today, thank you so much, Evan, for this session. As mentioned, I will be posting this on YouTube, so please share this with any of your coaches. And thank you all for attending.
And just one last thing, I'll put my email in the chat if anybody has any individual questions or anything that they want to follow up with, then feel free to contact me.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.